the one anecdote that just shocked me to my core was it was a wooden ceiling and there was some unevenness. And I said, all right, so, the guy pointed out to me and I said, that's fine. Just, back bevel it and plane it. And he said, what do you mean plane it? I said, what do you mean? What do you mean? I said, he didn't know what a plane was. This was a quote, trim carpenter or exterior trim carpenter. I had to go to Depot and buy him a little block plane, show him how to use it. It was like, wow, it's so cool. And that was very depressing. And this was literally a guy that was trained to basically nail up siding. And that was the degree of specialization that he had.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Modern Craftsman podcast. Today, I have a friend of mine, David Hornstein. You might know him from Dura Gutter, which we've talked about on our NS Builders YouTube channel. It's the gutters that we used on our Riverside passive house. Also, the 45 white oak project in our integrated gutter detail. What you might not know is that he was trained as a carpenter, builder, owned a design build firm, owned an architecture firm, and as we find out early in the conversation, went to an alternative high school, which I did not know what that was until he explained it. But we're going to talk about what his perspective is specifically around efficiency and how he believes that you can build really custom homes if you relentlessly focus on the efficiency of the individual tasks, and how we've strayed from that, away from the master builder to these hyper specialized trades, and how that has complicated the ability to be really efficient when it comes to custom homes.
This podcast is brought to you by Andersen Windows. When you're putting your name on a home, quality products aren't good enough. You also need brands you can trust to stand behind them. Andersen doesn't just make long-lasting windows and doors, they also have the service and support to back them up. This includes over 1,000 service providers available to assist on-site, fully transferable warranties, and programs that can help you unlock more value. It's one more reason pros trust Andersen for windows and doors. See product and warranty details at andersenwindows.com. That is very true. I've been able to find old parts and pieces of doors, windows, basement windows in a foundation from Andersen's that were 20, 30 years old through the Andersen team to replace parts that we didn't have to tear the house apart and replace the entire unit. So they have a very robust catalog of replacement parts and warranty help that you can have on units that you may have in your home or may be in your client's home that are upwards of 30 years old that I've found parts for. So if you need a part, if you need help, definitely reach out to them.
This podcast is also brought to you by Harnish Workwear. Their H-Label program is literally the t-shirts that we have at NS Builders, Material Millwork, Modern Craftsman, Motif Media, and then I'm just rattling off a handful of others I see on the website: Smart Floors, Curious Builder, The Build Show, Double H, HP Homes, Town and Tree Landscape, Active Builders, Pro Roof, Mark D. Williams Builders, Heritage, Kenzo, Admar, TrueFit Carpentry, and the list goes on. Guys, if you want a nice fitted work shirt, you got to head over to harnishworkwear.com, click on their H-Label program. They will get your brand, whether you have a file or you need a design done, on a t-shirt into your mailbox, and have your whole crew looking swell. All right, David, you emailed me. And you said that you made this comment about how you don't believe that custom needs to be expensive, which I love. And you went on to kind of explain like that you were obsessed. There's a couple things that you said, and I want to dig into all of them, but you were obsessed with finding efficient ways to do things. And you really believe in this master builder mindset. So, I want to dig into specifically like custom doesn't need to be expensive, because I agree with you. And I think our conversation kind of stemmed around our 45 wood oak project, which you were involved with. You produced the Dura Gutters for, which we'll come to the inventor side of what you've done with that later. But when you think about custom, like, why is that your mindset that it doesn't need to be expensive, and how have you approached that, especially being an architect?
I started in high school. Like I went to kind of an alternative high school, and we were building geodesic domes, and I hooked up with some design build guys in Vermont when I was like 15 that were doing. They were prefabbing dodecahedrons for affordable housing in Vermont as an alternative to trailers, and to people living in house trailers. And so I just thought these guys were the coolest guys in the world. Their whole lifestyle was super cool, and they're living in these funky farms, and just had cool vehicles, and just everything about the whole kind of. They weren't really hippie carpenters. They weren't long hairs, but they were cool guys.
Can I pause you for a second?
Yeah.
What is up with those homes? There's like a couple near us.
Oh, dodecahedron, really?
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out what he said. I was like,
yeah, there's a couple near us. There's one on the way to where I ride dirt bikes, and I know the guy who lives in it, and I asked him about it to pick his brain, but he's kind of off the wall and like really hard to, like, his personality matches the house, but I assumed it was some sort of like a kit house.
I think the idea of it was that it was just like a dome. It could be made in small components that could be trucked to the site and assembled, potentially assembled by unskilled people, kind of like the Frank Lloyd Wright block type of house. Yeah. Everybody's always trying to figure out a way to make a kit of parts that can be assembled. We certainly see that today, So in the end, like a lot of those projects, they got one order for like a vacation house as a prototype, and they couldn't get the financing together. But they had a big mill where they had jigged up all the parts. And so I got to see the whole sort of, what was cool about them was they were all either architects or architecture students that also had a lot of building experience, and they could freehand draw really complex connections and do all the thinking kind of on the fly. And I just thought that was kind of magical, the way they could kind of visualize something, draw it, and then build it, all kind of quick like that. And obviously if cost efficiency was the kind of primary ethos that they had, that was the whole point of this thing. And also when I went to high school, I went to this like alternative school, and there was a kind of funky art teacher that was like a shop guy, and he decided that we should build an addition to the school because it was an alternative school, so we just like rented buildings, and they weren't very good.
What does alternative mean? Sorry, what does alternative school mean?
Alternative, basically they created this school it was during the 70s, and they wanted a place to take all the smart troublemakers and get them out of the public school, so we wouldn't like give people ideas about the world. So it's like, hey, you can have your own school where you can study, capitalism and philosophy and all these things that we don't want to get into, and kind of stick them all over here. So it was an amazing experience. We had like one teacher for every 4 students, and I mean, you could just do whatever you wanted. It was amazing. So this art teacher, he said, hey, let's get some materials. So we took his pickup and we drove around to construction sites, to the dumpsters. They asked the contractors if we could grab some stuff out of the dumpsters, came back, started building that afternoon. And the thing I remember the most was we were just doing kind of pure foundations, and he wanted to make a shim, and he took a 2x and he took a straight claw hammer and hit it, and it made a perfect shim. And I just thought like, whoa, that's just cool, And so we built the thing like in 2 weeks, and then we had classes in there, with a funky tarp for a roof and everything. So the immediacy of it just really grabbed me, that you could have an idea and then build it. Obviously, dumpsters was a low-cost way to do that. And then I just started working on my own as a carpenter during high school, and then after doing decks and porches and stuff. And then for like the next, 5 years, I worked for design build crews off and on, different crews. And this was at a time, and I guess this is to sort of make a long story short, was that this was at a time when money was really tight in the economy. And, we were doing interesting work, but the budget was always everything. Even for the wealthy clients, they were, complaining about every extra nail that you would use. So there was really not the sort of fat built into the system that there is now, and cost plus really didn't exist. I mean, it was all bid. And, I had a design build company for 20 years, and if I was, our typical job was sort of 2-story kitchen family room addition, master suite kind of thing. And on, at the time you could do that for 450, 500,000, whatever. If we were 5'10" and the other guy was 5'11", he would get, 5'09", right? He would get the job. It was like that. And you could, I had a great, portfolio and, all that stuff, but people were super price sensitive. So the only way, you could keep a crew of, 9 guys busy day in and day out was to get these jobs. And for me, I wasn't interested. Money wasn't the primary thing. The primary thing for me was doing the work and doing stuff that I was interested in. And so the challenge was to get these interesting jobs that I could design and still somehow, not go broke doing them, And so that's where this kind of obsession with efficiency came in, because it was the only way that we could do that work and make a living.
What were, in those early days, what were the things that you were looking at from an efficiency standpoint?
Big things and little things. So the biggest thing I think is the structure, that I was always on the job.
Management structure.
Yeah, so I would always have a desk. I would set up a room somewhere in the basement or in a trailer or whatever, and I would be doing often other work for the company, but I was there to go out every hour and walk around and make sure everything, and I was there to answer any question, deal with any problems. So there was never, because, I was, before I started designing, I was doing a lot of jobs for architects, as a contractor. And the problem was always that we would have a question, you would try to reach them, whatever, it'd be a 2-week thing, you'd have a meeting, another week. And meanwhile, what are the guys supposed to do? We got to shift from this to that, you guys know that. So the whole time was money thing for me was you have to keep the flow of the job and not jump around, So the ability to be on site, answer, resolve questions immediately was sort of key. But the other thing was I was able to watch how we did stuff and really study the timesheets. And, I kind of figured out that in my bids, I would actually overbid on the tasks. I was never wrong on how long is it going to take for us to put up this piece of trim or whatever. If anything, I was too high. But what I learned was that 60% of the time we weren't actually doing anything that was in the bid. It was all this other stuff. And so what I was trying to do is figure out what is that other stuff and why are we wasting massive amounts of time doing this. So that's simple things like, when you're getting a delivery, have you cleared an area so the truck can drive, right up to where it needs to go so you're not handling the materials twice, just kind of being obsessed. And I think it really came from, sleepless nights of like, I'm losing my shirt on this job, so it was like, I was highly motivated to like, we need to get this stuff done. And because it's kind of life or death. And I think years of living like that instill in you this kind of instinctive, I can't go to a job and watch someone carry, 2x4s from here to there without wanting to say like, hey, I have an idea. Why don't you move on? It's just like, why are you like carrying, like, why isn't it all over there? Or why are you walking to the saw? Would it be better to bring the saw over there? Just right. All those things. I feel like in a given hour, most carpenters spend about 20 minutes doing carpentry and the rest doing other stuff, sort of related.
That's an interesting
stat. You mentioning the back and forth between architects. In my mind, Nick, being 40, it's always been digital. So getting answers has been relatively easy, and making changes and addendums to plans has like the immediacy of it in our generation is completely different than what you're probably speaking to, David, where it's like, these are hand-drawn plans or like rudimentary plans, and it's not as though it's like, I can shoot them a text or an email and get an answer back. Like, you physically have to meet with them or get on a phone call, meet with the clients, redraw things. So the amount of time is completely different than I think what most of our listeners are probably relating to.
Yeah. Well, I think it's also like it's why buildings are so much more complicated now. And just build like just the amount of detail and difficulties it is I have so many thoughts on this, but how difficult it is to build and how detailed it is because we do have the ability to like really push the limit of what can be done. And there's no, like, you think about vehicles. You know, I oftentimes reference vehicles. It's like, you know, I was talking to a friend of mine today, and we were, you know, we grew up in this like car community, and they were, you know, just for reference, like 99 to 2002, you know, GM trucks. They're simple. Like I could rebuild that truck with my eyes closed. It's like an engine, a transmission, a rear end. Like the technology is like straightforward. You have a radio. That's it. And the Yukon I drive today, like I have to have a subscription if I want to use cruise control. And it's like, and I could never, like there's so much Wi-Fi and tech in it, and it's evolved so quickly. Well, I guess 25 years, but what feels quick. And
you know, I would give the flip side of that though too. I definitely true of cars, but I feel like that actually we were doing really complicated stuff, and I think in some ways more so because what I find now is that tradespeople are much more risk averse than they were in my day. Like when I started out working for crews, we did our own plumbing and electrical, like code-wise, you could do that stuff. And we did a lot of fixed glazing and a lot of, we were involved in all the parts of the project. Sometimes we did our own plastering, you know, and not over blueboard, you know, metal lath and the whole 9 yards. And I think that it was in some ways you had to know a broader. There was less sort of performance stuff that obviously is a big deal now. But even then, solar was a huge deal, and we were doing. It may have been wrong, but we were doing some pretty complicated, you know, solar stuff too.
But just to chime in there, David, like the one thing I would say is you were doing complicated things, but I think that there was this general sense of acceptance of the fact that the design would go so far, and then you would hand it over to what you deem as like the master builder that would then evolve it into the final product. And that final product was, you know, the drawings never reflected it exactly because like the drawing wasn't iterated that far because it wouldn't have made sense. Nowadays we have hundreds of pages of details, and you know, and like that's something that we pride ourselves on is like working with architects. Like we want to execute the detail exactly as they intended, but there is this level of, you know, man, like there's a lot of time and a lot of where it's really complicated, and you know, and should it be?
Well, drawings were, I think that's a good point. Like you look at some Frank Lloyd Wright houses and they were 8 pages of drawings or something, you know, and it's interesting in the, you know, now that we're doing the gutter business, so we deal with, you know, a lot of really good architects every day and see like, you know, hundreds of sets of plans, and the range of what's in a set of plans is absolutely tremendous, you know, from anywhere.
Bananas.
And even for this, you know, for a complicated, you know, big house, it can be 8 pages up to 150 pages, you know.
Right.
But I think the difference was to some extent that because you were hand drawing, you focused on what the builder needed to know that he didn't know.
Yeah.
And now, because it's easy to throw in boilerplate and sections and cut and paste and all that, a lot of what's in plans is just, and it's also a different liability scenario now, you know, where it kind of, if you don't put it in, I struggle with that when I draw plans is, you know, I often say when a client asks me, you know, what's it going to cost? I say it depends on whether I know the builder or not, because if I don't know the builder, I have to assume they know nothing, and even from a liability standpoint, I have to draw everything. To a builder that I know is competent, you know, 90% of that is just a waste of time and money because it's already known, you know. And so I guess in the old days, there weren't so many typical wall sections and all that stuff, and it was really more like we're going to draw the tricky stuff, the part that you wouldn't know. So that was still in there, but a lot of the other stuff wasn't, you know. But yeah, definitely the 3D piece, which, you know, is huge. That, you know, you had to, I think, draw more to express. Although realistically, even now with 3D, I'm still drawing the plan and the section, whether I have the 3D or not, because you're not dimensioning a 3D drawing. So, you know, it's not really saving that, but it's derived from the same model. So once I create that 3D model, the section comes from that on that drawing.
Hey guys, real quick break. We just launched the Modern Craftsman system, which is the 5 systems that we use to run our businesses. It's everything we've learned in the last decade of doing the podcast and running our individual businesses, distilled down into information that you can use, and immediately in your business, from 33 lessons to over 100 deliverables and templates, stuff that is actually going to help you build a better business and get out of the chaos that you can feel in the day-to-day operation of running a construction business. So if you're interested, there's a link below. Click it, gives you all the information.
It's become quicker for you to draw or detail these homes out, or it actually takes you longer based on everything that you're trying to implement and integrate?
Definitely quicker. I mean, I think that, well, for one thing, part of it is just experience. I've done like 300 houses, and so a lot of it is I don't have to think about the detail anymore, and I'm really just focusing on that which is different and how to do that. But the other thing that I think is really important is going back to this master builder thing is, and Tyler, when you were talking about this idea of calling the architect and getting the answer, and it took longer before, now it's quicker. But a lot of times the problem isn't the speed, but it's the knowledge. Does the architect know this stuff, and can they, on the fly, give you the right solution? And I know, Nick, you've talked about working closely with the architect. Going back to this master builder idea, I sort of have a totally different take, which is I think that the person that designs the building should supervise the construction. And I think that from an economic standpoint, that's complicated and there's different models, but I just think that in most cultures and throughout time, that's been the way it was done. And I remember being in Thailand and seeing this unbelievable temple that they had built with, like I was standing on the stairway, and the stairway was like 150 stairs, and the railings were these curved dragon carvings with, mosaic built in. I mean, just incredible works of art, every piece of it. And this guy was standing there, I was admiring it, and he said to me, what do you think, or whatever. He turned out to be the designer and builder. This guy just on site, involved in every single aspect of how they're mixing the mortar, how they're arranging, and that just makes the most sense to me. And that, both from making sure that your design is implemented exactly, but also eliminating all the communication errors and time involved.
Are you speaking specifically to custom?
Yeah, definitely custom house. Yeah, I mean, there would be no reason if you're building, if a builder's building the same house 20 times, he doesn't need that. Yeah.
How much different is that than the scenario where the design may not be as comprehensive, but you have a builder coming in who's taking that and handling all aspects of that top to bottom, more so like this master builder? And the reason I ask that is because I feel I experience that a lot, where I'm on the job every day. We're self-performing so much of the work. So I feel sometimes it doesn't make sense for me or my clients to get high-level architecturals done when I'm still sorting all of those details out on the job from top to bottom. So a lot of the architecturals that we get more so are structurals, and then we're sorting out the rest of the design, and it's me on the job, it's me laying things out, actually self-performing work. It feels to me, design intent aside, that's a similar scenario when you just have one point of contact that's on the job every day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the best. I think that one place I would push back is to me, the advantage of having the designer, whether that designer is the architect or whoever, manage it, kind of throughout from beginning to end, is that, like, for instance, with I saw a video the other day where it was some high-end builder on YouTube, and he was talking about how these lights in a kind of beamed grid ceiling, there were a couple of them that weren't centered properly, and sort of should they move them or not. And he was kind of implying that he was so quality oriented that he was going to move them because it would really bother him. But I looked at that and I thought that's just a basic screw up of that. The the lighting plan should have been integrated in 3D with the framing plan. And, when you're looking at all those layers, that mistake would never happen. So to me, that was just saying that I have a bad process and I'm sort of fixing it in the finish, And so I think that when you say sort of working out the details, I think it's really tough to. What I always hate is if I've designed something and a builder calls me and says, "Can you come to the site? We're thinking of changing this and we just want to do this," or whatever. And I think, so that's a solution sort of on the fly, here we are. And I think that sounds perfectly reasonable, but I know there was a reason I did it differently. And the problem was, at the time I was designing it, I understood the whole project. I understood the whole 3D thing. I was overlaying everything. Now I'm in the field. I'm looking at this little piece of it. I'm maybe not remembering what was critical about this. And so I'm losing that piece of it, So I do feel like either it has to all be in the design and in the drawings, and then the person in the field, if they totally understand it, can implement it, or the person that designed it has to be there so that they can remember, no, wait a minute, the reason this matters is because of this, and we haven't built that part yet, so obviously it doesn't seem important, but once we build that, it's going to align with this and it's going to matter, So somehow there has to be that continuity from beginning to end.
Yeah, I feel like there's fewer and fewer architects who want to be a part of the build these days.
Yeah,
like most architects that I know want to make their money on design, and then they want to step away from it, and then they'll give you as-built if need be. But other than that, like, it just seemed, and that's even with older architects that I know, that it's not young architects that are up and coming. These are people who have been doing this for years, where they're just like, I want to do the design, I want to get on to the next design, and then I'll hand this off to you and let me know what you need submitted for changes.
Absolutely. That's true. I think that's absolutely true. And, and the problem with that is, like, I mean, it's definitely, what I do is not a good way to make money. So
yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say. Like, it's so hard to capture that.
Yeah. But, like, for instance, I rarely put dimensions on drawings because I put alignments, but there's no way that it's going to get built exactly like what I've drawn. And if you're doing really critical stuff, once one dimension is off, then everything is off, right? So if you're talking about...
if you dimension the wrong thing, like, they take that as the holy grail and they work in the wrong direction.
Right. So my feeling is, you can't, if you're designing some built-in cabinetry or something, obviously you have to have the real framing dimensions. And maybe if it's an inch smaller, the thing you wanted to do doesn't even work. And you have to, so I don't like to, the client always says, well, do the whole set of drawings and then we'll change it if need be. But I'm like, why would I draw it twice? Why don't I just get the actual measurements and then we'll build, design then what fits. But no, entirely, you're absolutely right. A better way to make money is to, when people say to me, it must be great being an architect, and I say, well, the first 5% is great because that's the fun, creative part, and the other 95% is implementation. So if you can be the person that just does sort of high-level schematic and basic elevations, get paid and move on, that's the holy grail. Maybe not in terms of getting the perfect product, and also you can get the perfect product if you just keep fixing stuff that wasn't thought of. So eventually you can get there. And the client's paying for it, not you, so it doesn't matter to you as the architect, But just kind of not having come from that way, it feels wrong to me to do it.
Do you feel that it's gotten more difficult to manage builders and jobs with the way that things have gone and the specialization of trades?
Absolutely. I mean, the one anecdote that just shocked me to my core was I was on this project that I designed, and I was actually managing the construction too, and they were putting up a frieze board, and it was a wooden ceiling, and there was some unevenness, and I said, all right, so, the guy pointed it out to me, and I said, that's fine, just, back bevel it and plane it, and he said, what do you mean plane it? I said, what do you mean? I said, he didn't know what a plane was. This was a quote, trim carpenter, or exterior trim carpenter. I had to go to Depot and buy him a little block plane, show him how to use it. It was like, oh, it's so cool. And that was very depressing. And this was literally a guy that was trained to basically nail up siding. And that was the degree of specialization that he had.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very tough, both from a standpoint of not knowing what people know, but also if you're doing custom details, just very hard to get people out of their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And I've found that if you can get people excited about it and they want to learn to be a part of a cool project, that's the only way it's going to work. Because if you're just trying to whip them to do it, the minute you stop whipping, it's going to stop. So.
I think that's why the specialization has gotten so extreme, is just to create efficiencies within workflow to be able to make more money or to be able to gain better margins with business. Like, I don't really see there any other reason for doing that. I think with the intent should be that you're going to handle one trade and you're going to be the absolute best at that one trade. But I feel like so much of it is actually pushed more so by looking to economize the work and make more money because things are so price driven, and because we're with how much we have at our fingertips, we're expected to build more in less amount of time. I don't necessarily think that a lot of the specialization is just to be able to be the best at that trade, and that there are outliers there, but I think for the most part, it's to try and make money.
But I think, and I agree, but I think there's also a cultural shift that when I was, I mentioned that when I started out, I thought these guys were super cool, and every crew I ever worked on was, really smart people that I really looked up to, not just smart carpenters. They just knew a lot about the world and all that. And they were professional carpenters for, at least until their body couldn't do it anymore. That, from a class standpoint, with the whole you have to go to college thing, that group, that cohort doesn't really exist anymore. Maybe it's coming back a little bit now. And I think now you have this sort of de-skilled, manual labor class who don't get their self-identity from sort of the idea of mastery, and I mean, we used the first crew I worked on, we were doing a lot of woodworking, and the guys, we would plane boards, and everybody would take a tack and stick their shaving up to the ceiling to see if any could make one long enough to touch the floor. Your plane was sharp
They
enough.
have like full competitions with that, Japanese woodworking competitions.
Yeah. So to me, like I looked up, and another time I was doing a job and I thought I was a pretty good carpenter and I could hang a door and whatever, half an hour or something. I had this job where it was on my own house. I had built an addition, had 24 doors. I hired this little guy to hang the doors, and he started at like 8:30 in the morning. He came at 2 and he said, I want a check or something. And I said, I'm not going to pay you till you're done. He said, no, I'm all done. And I went in and he hung 24 doors perfectly in 5.5 hours or something. He took lunch and everything. And I thought, I don't know shit about hanging doors. I mean, just I thought I did. And I think what you have now is you don't have these senior people on the job. There aren't people for other people to look up to and to see themselves as like, hey, this could be my career. I could be an accomplished, craftsperson. And so their attitude is just, I'm here to make money, bang, 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 And I think that if there was more of a sense of the identity of it and the pride and all that, more of a European craft model, I think a new generation of people could want to be on the job and want to not be so specialized, because specialization is boring. It might be efficient, but I wouldn't want to just nail siding all day long.
I mean, how much do you feel that product development has, I guess, derailed some of that pride in what you're doing and craft and artisan nature of the work?
Sure, it's the pre-hung door. I mean, basically,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I even think from like a tile perspective and mud beds and wet beds and screeds, it's very labor intensive work, but it's very satisfying, and it's very difficult with any product that's come out to match the tolerances that you can execute with that. And there's pros and cons to that, but I feel that when you're able to execute on that level with such simple products and tools and actually use your knowledge and skill set, that it can be far more rewarding.
Well, I think there's like two parts of being a carpenter, and I like love carpentry, but I remember when I was building a stair in my own house, and at that point I'd already built a million stairs, and I did the first two treads and risers, and I looked up, and there were 14 more to go, and I thought, this is freaking boring. I don't want to do the rest of them. I've already sort of solved the interesting part.
Right. You're me. You're
getting
me.
it all right, and now I have to do it again and again. So I think that the ability to organize the work and execute it in a certain way, the problem solving aspect of it is what makes carpentry interesting. So even if you have these materials that have built in some of the sort of hand labor, you're still doing the problem solving and you're still doing that piece of it. And again, that's where I think the specialization kind of hurts you, because if that's all you do, then you're not actually doing problem solving anymore, because you already know how to do all that. But if you're doing a tile shower one day and you're doing this the next day, etc., your brain is still engaged, and that's I think that's what makes it satisfying work. I also have this sort of general critique of the trend now, and it's been now for a while, of sort of people with no carpentry background being builders. And I designed a place, at this point it was probably 15 years ago. It was a very high-end house. And I interviewed all the high-end Boston contractors, and almost none of them had a carpentry background, which astounded me. They come from banking, or they came from software development or whatever. And they were clearly good managers, and they understood that the skill set for a successful construction company was management, really, so they were sort of ahead. But at the same time, I thought, I can't work with them, because what I'm all about is the details, and these guys don't know details, so there's going to be some cumbersome process to sort of get to where I want to go. And I think the problem is when that's at the top, then that filters through the whole company. So there really isn't the same emphasis. And it's not like it's good or bad. It's just like, I would have never gone into the business if the business was like, hey, you could be a manager, because I could make more money as a software manager, or something like that. And it would be, a project manager in a software company is essentially doing exactly the same thing as a construction project manager. So if you're not touching the materials, and if you're not freezing your butt off in the cold, if you're not doing all the things that make building houses different than doing software, then you might as well make the big money and do, manage other stuff, So I feel like that's kind of lost too.
Going back to your point earlier about the architect building, you think about the structure now, the reliance is, in our case, like on the site super. And that site super, information goes from the architect to the builder, and then from the builder to the project manager, and then the site super, and then the site super is coordinating that to the subs, and the subs are coordinating that to their tiers of, labor. And it's like, when you really think about that, that there is, you have so much inefficiency of communication flow, where
I hate to hire where you're not dealing directly with the person that's going to do the work.
Yeah,
chances of 100% communication are pretty low.
Yeah, everyone's played the game of telephone, right? Like, by the time it gets to the person that's doing it, it's like, wait, what am I doing? Yeah. And that inefficiency exists, and but we have built this whole culture around the fact that, to your point, that what we are selling to clients oftentimes is how well we can manage the job. Right. Can we keep it on budget and on schedule? And then, high quality construction is, on budget, on schedule, and high quality craftsmanship is kind of, in most homeowners' perspective, that's baseline. Like, of course it's gonna be on budget and on schedule and like quality. But the reality is, like, almost all three of those are completely compromised in most construction projects.
Yeah, and the budget is also, so when I sort of emailed you, I had just completed two, very custom houses that I did for $3 a square foot.
Which is and just for reference, anyone that's listening, they're all over the country. So like $300 a square foot sound like to some is so much. But that's not. Where our floor is creeping up to $1,000 a foot. Right. Like, we could build at 800. we can absolutely not build under 800 if we're managing it the way that we sell our management. We just can't.
Yeah, and the last house that I designed that I ended up managing because I called a bunch of, their budget was like 1.8 for a 6,000 square foot house. And even the sort of not quite top tier said, I can't have a dedicated super that's going to live there. I can have a guy that comes by when needed kind of thing, and we'll be in touch on the phone, all that.
Yeah.
But the way we did it was that I hired an older guy. I mean, I'm 70. I hired a guy that was like 65 or something, and he was there all day long. He wore the belt sometimes, but he was there all day, every day. And he, part of it was like expectations. There was a lot of pushback between him and the subs. The subs, my experience with subs is generally the right way is the easy way for them, right? The right way is the way they can make money. It's not necessarily the way you want it to be. And I think one of the problems is when you have young supers, hard to push back against older subs. When you're older, you can say, my line that I use all the time on the job is when people tell me it can't be done, I always say, because I get that constantly, and I always say, if I hadn't done it 10 times before, I would absolutely take your word for it. But, here's pictures of like the last job, So there has to be, pushback, both in terms of performance and in terms of getting the details the way you want it. And I think that one way that we were able to do it, for about half is that only dealing with subs that do the work directly, because we're not paying for a management structure. And the danger of, you talk about the guy in the pickup and all that, but that's okay with subs. I don't care if a sub has a sophisticated, kind of back office. If a guy says he's going to do tile work and he shows up to do tile work, I don't care if he's up in the middle of the night writing an invoice.
I think the same thing for a builder. I say that to clients all the time. Like, listen, like you could hire, like David, in a truck. He shows up and he's the builder and that's it. Like he might be a better builder. He might build the exact same quality or better than me. The difference is that you are asking for a well-managed and communicated process. That is what we're selling.
Exactly, and that's the biggest change. And it's because a new professional class has emerged over the last 40 years. It sort of didn't exist before, and I think that so many times when I have designed something and I have suggested a couple contractors to the client, they always hire the better presenter, no matter what. It's just, because obviously a professional can't know what good work is, but they deal in a professional environment every day, so they know what a professional presentation looks like. So what does it look
like? Like, I'm curious at what you see. What is that? What is the better
so a
presentation?
Difference would be, like, I'll give you an example of a job I did a couple of years ago where one builder that I used was a working class guy, great work. His father had done it, the whole thing. And he came to the job and he had some pictures of jobs he had done, and he talked about pride in his work and all that stuff. And then the other guy, higher end guy, had a laptop, he had a brochure, he talked about the process, about transparency. He used the same language that they use. And then I asked them who they chose, and of course they chose that guy. And I said, I'm curious, why didn't you choose so-and-so? And they said, he seemed really salesy to me. He was like trying to, and they just, basically it was a cultural mismatch. It had nothing absolutely to do with what they could or couldn't do, The other guy, the working guy, was more experienced, and actually the guy that did the job, we had a sort of complicated stairway, and they were nice guys. I liked them a lot. But I was doing all these 3D drawings and doing all this stuff, and they just didn't have the sort of depth of carpentry knowledge to execute it. And he was saying, I need more information. And I said at one point, finally, like, short of building this for you, like I've reached the limit of like what I can do. I'm just going to stand here next to you and we're going to talk about it. Like, put the board here, do this, because he had, 6 years of experience. And, the other guy had 18 or something, so, but yeah, at the high end, that guy is not getting any jobs. It's only about the presentation. And it's not to say that you can't be a great presenter and a great builder, but I don't think the two necessarily go hand in hand.
I think that a lot of times, like I'm a smaller contractor and I'm built on and I'm dealing with clients, I'm dealing with designers, I'm dealing with the people doing the work, and I'm doing a lot of the work myself. And I always say to a lot of other men and women who want to be small that you're going to execute at a higher level than almost every other big company because you're in the work every single day and you're dealing with it. And even when I hire subs, I try and hire subs where the owner of the company still does the work. And the big difference to me has always been I can't execute at the scale that those other like I can't execute at the scale that Nick does. I wouldn't be able to build a white oak house because I don't have the systems, I don't have the manpower, I don't have the resources to do that. But on a smaller project, I can execute at a higher level and a higher attention to detail because that's what I'm set up to do, and because I'm completely immersed in that project. And I think as long as you understand that and you understand who your clients are, that you can have a very successful career if you're meeting the expectations that were set forth when you're selling that work and selling it to the right clients.
But, you could, I totally agree with you. And I think what's sort of sad to me is that the two models aren't somewhat combined. Like, so you think, well, these job supers that start out as young, they eventually actually learn a lot and they become good. But then what happens is they immediately get kicked upstairs to being a sort of roving supervisor. So now they're managing 6 jobs and they're still only there for an hour. So again, the knowledge gets sort of pulled out of the thing, And if a guy like you was on the job, on sort of Nick's job, it would add tremendous value because you'd have all this experience. But that class of older supervisors that are on the job, I don't think exists at all.
I think it ultimately, a lot of it comes down to just the cost of having a business that size and the overhead and how your margins shrink the more work that you do. And even especially custom work, there's very little efficiency there from a process perspective where it's like, hey, I'm building a one-off project each and every time. So I think a lot of times it comes down to just the expense of running a business at that scale is difficult to be able to just say, hey, I'm going to plant one. Like the people who are able to do that really well are able to attribute one person to one job and not one person to 3 jobs, because then they're just focused on that one job. But I think that so many people are forced to be competitive with everyone else who has that super split across 3 jobs that it's like, whoa, your management's way more expensive. But they don't understand that you're getting a different level of service and execution when you have one super on one job and those people are trying to make more money. And I think a lot of times it's not that they don't have the ability to, it's almost that they're forced to do more work in order to make the money that they need to with their business. And a lot of times what ends up happening, and Nick and I have spoke to this endlessly, is that like you have fundamental flaws within your business, and so now you're having your super do 3x the amount of jobs, and those flaws aren't getting smaller. Like you're usually just exploiting them even more. So it doesn't really fix the problem.
If owners were educated, the main thing I say to customers when they're paying a contractor is ask to meet the supervisor that's going to do your job and find out if they're going to be dedicated from the beginning to the end, if they're going to spend 8 hours a day. And let's talk to that person and not the boss who you're never going to see again after this meeting, basically, because that's who you're going to be dealing with, really. And is this person actually a problem solver? And is this a person that you like and all that, But I wish I think that if there were, the difference in costs, let's say you're paying your super $100,000 and the super experienced guy would be $150 or something. That $50,000 over the course of a multi-million-dollar job is going to be saved 1 million times.
Oh, yeah.
So
I've explained this where it's like we bill in our business. We bill for. I mean, our model. We bill for the role, and that role can the pay rate for the employee spans. And the way, I've explained it to like other builders when we talk about it is that, listen, like say it's a $25 to $35 an hour person, that I'm still billing the same amount to the client, regardless if they're making 25 or 35. That $10 spread is the $10 that the $25 an hour person's going to make in mistakes. When you hit 35, like we're gonna make the same amount of money on any of those people. It's just a matter of how much training and mistakes are you make. Like how much training do you require and how many mistakes are you gonna make? Yeah. And then, but going back to something you said, which I think is important to double click on, is that the idea that when a carpenter becomes really good, that we graduate them into a site super role. And then when that site super gets really good, hey, do you want to be a project manager? And that is a career path in construction. Like that is kind of how you work linear through a construction career. And the reality is like that just because you're a great carpenter doesn't mean you're a great super. And I would say that even more so, like just because you're a great super absolutely does not mean you're a great project manager. But that's the path that I think we kind of force these people into, where I would push back and say, forget it. Like, be a great carpenter and then be so great that, just using $35 an hour as an example, that I can pay you 40, 45, 50, $100 an hour as a carpenter because you're so good. Like you're so efficient, you make no mistakes, you are problems like, and you continue to be the very best version of it. Now that is,
and you're inspiring and teaching people, which I think is
exactly, and that's how we look at.
You take that guy upstairs. He's not there on the job. He's
gone
telling stories and whatnot to inspire people.
Yeah, we look at like we have a career document that basically gives someone like a path on how they can work through the business or work through the company. And as you graduate into these like more senior level carpenters, part of it is, hey, I want you looking backwards and coaching the guys that are in the trenches and bringing them up. Same thing with the supers. It's like as you graduate to a more senior level super, you will still be responsible for a job, but I also want you to dedicate 10% of your time to coaching the other supers. And checking in on them and making sure that they're progressing.
And I totally agree. The skills of being a supervisor. I mean, it's the classic. Carpenter becomes contractor and goes out of business because the skills of being a contractor are completely different. I always say to people that work for me, being a contractor is much more like running a retail store than it is like being a craftsperson. You're worried about, receivables. It's totally different. And some people, are super focused and great at their work and just suck at, helping other people and dealing with conflict, right? That's a huge thing. Most people aren't good at that, so the skill set of a supervisor might be totally different. And ideally, that supervisor has all that construction knowledge. But I think in great companies, the sort of logistics manager and all that doesn't pretend to know, about carpentry, but they know about detail and they know about listening and they know about coordination and they do all the stuff that maybe the essence of what a super might want to do, which is make sure that this thing gets to this place at this time. So everybody, that stuff isn't carpentry per se, so getting people to be in the right role. And a lot of supers are not that happy because they are away from the thing that they were good at, and they can't go back because of the money, but, they kind of, I see a lot of guys sitting in their truck and whatnot, and you can tell that they would just sort of prefer not to be there, but they can't go back to being a carpenter at that point. And I do think a lot of it is status. I mean, I do think in this culture, there isn't even a concept of there is a concept of a master builder. Unfortunately, at this point, a guy that buys a chop saw, and can cut a miter is now officially a master carpenter. People definitely don't know what they don't know. And so they don't need to look up to anybody because they already know everything. And there's
and we've stripped that. Like you said earlier, it's like everything is so special. Like everything is specialty. And, it is interesting. I mean, to peel that all the way back to the earlier conversation of architecture and just efficiency, yet we've kind of dumbed down the tasks by making each person each individual person dedicated to only one specialty thing, so it's super easy to grasp the understanding of it and do that job. Where this is where my mind goes, is that okay, if we're going to build more complicated homes, then we need to spend more time really understanding what it's going to take to build them before we start. And it's it's why, I mean, I talk about pre-construction like it's my job, because I guess in some ways it is, but it's that everything is reliant on that. And I think that we still live in this world where the majority of people would prefer to just be under construction and start construction and figure it out in the field, which now compounds the issue of, well, you don't have an 8-page drawing set anymore that leaves interpretation open to the builder. You might have an 8-page drawing set, but the architect is expecting that you build exactly what they've designed, and you have spent less than a month with those drawings, and you're shipping raw materials to a job site with a bunch of guys that are dedicated to like singular tasks to now assemble it. And what happens is
that's how I got into design, was the frustration of essentially designing it for the architect. I felt like all these unresolved details, or these details that didn't work, and I thought, hey, I should be getting paid for figuring all this stuff out.
Yeah. Right.
And I see that, I mean, that specialization is definitely in the design world too, because, dealing with the gutters, I deal with the people in the firm who have been put in charge of detailing the gutters, which is a very low level, apparently, task, and so a lot of times they don't really know the details and the framing and just everything that they would need to know. I mean, I think details are what the most experienced person in the company should do, not the least.
Right.
Because that's literally where the rubber meets the road. And, a lot of things just like, and I do think that people fundamentally, I mean, this is controversial to say, and I'll alienate architects, but I think you should have some building experience if you're designing houses, because just things that that are hard to learn, like, for instance, can you actually get a nail gun in that space to nail those things together? A carpenter is going to look at a set of drawings and just intuitively understand there's just no way that can be built like in that sequence or in that way. Mm-hmm. But if you haven't lived that, you're just not going to know that, or just certain things that have to do with materials that would be in different phases sort of integrated into the same thing. And I'm like, yeah, but that guy's not even on site yet, so you can't really do it that way. So you should have to have had some kind of real world just to get at least a feel for it,
I say that about kitchen design a lot, where it's like, this just doesn't work, and it's just because you've never installed a kitchen before. And there's like so many of the little issues and hiccups that you run into. If you were to have installed a few kitchens, you would have been like, that doesn't work, and I know why, and I'll never do that again. So I'd said something very similar before, and it probably doesn't make a lot of people happy, and I understand I'm being very biased there, but it's absolutely true.
My favorite kitchen thing like that is that an architect designed a kitchen that was everything was super flush and, hidden everything, and there were no filler strips in the corner. And I said, you can't do it that way. And they said, no, just do what I say and all this. And I said, do you know what filler strips are for? And he's like, listen, just do it the way. And I kept going through it. I said, all right, I'm going to do it exactly. So we meets in the corner. Client goes to open the drawer, right? So the drawer pull hits the other drawer pull, because these were not flush pulls, right? So you could open each drawer in the corner like 8 inches until it hit the pull. And I said, guess what? That's why we have filler strips. And, but sometimes you just got to give them what they want, and let them learn that way, and luckily at that point, the client looked at the architect, not me, and said, wait a minute.
Well, you're lucky. I was going to say, I mean, that would have still been the builder's fault.
Right.
Like, Nick, you knew this and still did it? Okay.
Yeah.
How did you, so let's talk about the gutters, because you have essentially invented an extruded aluminum gutter called Dura Gutter, which we've used a couple times now. Why did you invent this?
So I did it. I did a job about 17 years ago where I was doing a mission style house that had wood gutters that had sort of rotted like they typically do, so they were lined with copper and all that, and it was an integral part of the design of that house, and we were adding like a 7,000 foot addition to it, and I wanted to maintain that line around the new work, and I didn't want to do it in wood because wood these days is not the redwood and the cypress of days gone by. It's fir, and it's going to last a couple of years, So, so I got a price at the time for a fiberglass gutter. Won't mention a brand name, and it was super high, and I just thought, like, this is crazy. And I used aluminum for different things because I really liked how straight it was and how you can cut it like wood and all that. So I was very familiar with using aluminum, and so I thought I could have a die made and make a copy of a wood gutter out of aluminum and see if that would be cheaper. And it was, but I had to make a certain amount. Like, you couldn't make 200 feet. You had to make like a couple thousand feet. So I just had all this gutter lying around, and contractors would see that house and want to buy it. And so I just basically sold off that stuff and was done. And then someone saw it and had a big project and they wanted it, so I had some more made. And then it just sort of by accident grew into a business. And then I had been at that point 50 years in design and construction and was kind of had enough, and I did one job that lasted 7 years, a big house, and that one kind of did me in. And so it coincided with a time when there was kind of an increasing demand for the gutters. So I just said, maybe I'll just do this. And my son joined me in that. And for me, it was kind of like a new creative thing because I really wanted to, like, my company's called Reinvent, and I really wanted to reinvent gutters. It started as this just kind of traditional copy of a wood gutter. But I just started thinking about what could you do with gutters that would be cool, and why do they have to be the shape they are? And just from a standpoint of doing modern architecture, I thought there really isn't such a thing as a modern gutter. There's just simply a box gutter, and that's it. So I started thinking of all these different shapes, and and there's I do a lot of design because there's a lot of stuff about what is manufacturable and what is cuttable in the field, and how can relatively unskilled people work with this material and all that stuff. So there's I basically spend my days kind of working with architects to integrate kind of cool looking gutters into cool looking designs, and so there's constantly new things, and we develop like new products all the time. I'm developing now a kind of hybrid rain chain downspout, because I think like rain chains are cool, but they're not efficient. Downspouts are boring. And so what if you could have something that was kind of as cool as a rain chain, but worked as well as a downspout, So this is like a fluted tube where the water runs down the inside and the outside. So you get the effect of seeing the water, but it doesn't splash and all that. So it's just kind of fun to, and we do a lot of kind of 3D printing of prototypes. So it's just taking the part I liked about carpentry, which is making stuff, and the part I like about designing, which is kind of, have an idea in the shower, go design it on the computer, 3D print it, play with it, test it, that kind of thing. So it's sort of just...
Sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
Are you fabricating different profiles for your rakes where you're tying in the gutters? Or are you rolling that? Yeah.
Well, we don't make it out of aluminum, so we actually mill those out of Spanish cedar because they're covered by
gutter,
the roof.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then you have a standard gutter profile, and then you're adjusting whatever you need to for the rake trim to make that miter work?
That's the fascinating thing. We've copied a detail from the late 1800s, which was that the same rake can be used from 3 and 12 to 14 and 12. So we don't actually have to make a different rake profile. It's just a different compound miter that you cut.
Okay.
So it's the same rake.
But it's a different profile than the gutter.
Exactly, yeah. But it matches the gutter, yeah.
Yeah, that's very neat.
It's the old classic detail that
everyone screws up.
So our business is really, exactly. That's my kind of soapbox.
Roll it or like cut it and then grind the tip of it square.
I have a hall of shame on the website of various implementations of that. Yeah, but it's like shooting fish in a barrel. I mean, it's not hard.
Yeah. I mean, it's like one of my favorite details when done right. Yeah. And especially
my argument is
it doesn't seem like it's done right.
Yeah, it's actually easier to do. I'm going to go to my grave convincing people that returning the gutter horizontally and having the extra miter is actually more work than mitering it into the rake. And it just looks
because you'd need to come flat first. You'd need to transition from the vertical to horizontal and then from the horizontal to the horizontal with another.
Well, a lot of people just, the typical thing in New England is you wrap the gutter around the cornice return, but that's...
flat,
That's actually the wrong... It's not a classical detail. If you look in Greek architecture and all, the gutter always, miters in. So, but that's another story. But yeah, so it's just basically a sort of, creative outlet, and also it scales in a different way than construction does, because we can scale up the business in a way that would be very difficult if you were actually having to build everything that you did, so we can sell the gutters all over the country and in Canada, whereas I couldn't, physically do those jobs. So
you don't own the manufacturing, right?
No,
So design.
We just basically patented the design, and we own the designs and stuff. Yeah.
So what does that look like as you obviously your son is a partner now, like as you think about scaling a business like that, you said it kind of happened out of accident, but what does scaling a gutter business look like for you?
Yeah, I think about that a lot. I think about it's really more Doug, my son's decision, because I'm really too old to want to spend the next 15 years growing a huge business. That's not what I want to do. So I want to stay in the role of having fun and doing product design and doing detailing. And it's really up to him how big he wants to grow. At this point, we're growing about 50% a year. We sort of,
50?
Yeah. So we started out, we did 300,000, then we did 6, then we did 9. Now we're going to do $1 million plus. So we could get up to 1.6 million or something but that 1.6 million is like 120 sales a year. So we basically have to I think we figured out we have to sell a job every other day, and it's not like your local roll form guy. I mean, selling a job is a multi-touch. In some cases there'll be 85 emails back and forth before we do that. But some of the jobs we do are, really large. They're, we just did a job in Texas that was 1,000 feet of gutter. So, so we try to, sort of one aspect of scaling is to try to get away from the onesies and twosies and concentrate on the big projects, because just like doing, it's like I always used to say to people, doing a kitchen is like building a house. I mean, you get the same number of trades and all that, So selling a big job is almost the same as selling a small job. So we prefer the big jobs. If we got much bigger, we would need much more infrastructure. So that's the scaling tipping point, sort of.
So you must your focus must be the architecture and the design.
The architects, right? Yeah. Exactly. Architects and kind of luxury builders. We do get a lot of homeowners because we were on this old house a few years ago, and they keep replaying that. So, kind of a fun part of the business is people will call us up from places that I would have never dreamed have these absolutely exceptional older houses. Like the middle of nowhere. It would be this farmhouse in Missouri or in Kansas or whatever. And I get this email, we're in Kansas, and I'm like, sort of roll my eyes. And then they send me pictures of these absolutely spectacular houses that some, mill owner built or something like that. And
Dude,
so
Kansas City's
work
awesome.
on some, incredible. So
Kansas City's in Missouri.
I know.
You just said Kansas.
Oh, I thought you said Kansas City. My bad.
So I don't discount the homeowner side of it, but the architects are, homeowners are a one-off, right? And
Sure.
Architects are repeat business, so that's why we.
Yeah, and it can be a conduit for a new architect contact.
Yeah, right. So yeah.
Because you think about like going back to Tyler, your comment earlier about like how products have evolved to basically make our life easier or process easier. Gutters have turned into just a mechanism to move rainwater, not an architectural detail. It's just use a K-style gutter. It's like, well, that is modeled after an architectural detail that now is this bolted on piece that, they pitch 1.5 inches to make sure water doesn't get stuck in it, and it ruins the side of your house. It's like, well,
imagine if you were doing a $5 million house or a $2 million house, and for the crown molding, you went to Depot and you bought their, 1.5 inch MDF crown or something and put it up, right? And the owner would go nuts. But that's the equivalent of putting a K gutter on a nice house. I mean, it's the most visible part of the house from the outside, and yet it's the place where often not included in the drawings, and it's up to the builder to,
No, you're right. It's like, what do you want to do? It's like half round or K style, and that's like the and then you get into, if you start talking about integrated, it's like, forget about it. It's now you're introducing rainwater to the envelope, and it's like, how do you detail this? And this is going to be a nightmare. And
I just had that discussion earlier today, and people always say, I don't want to have pipes in my walls, and I say, oh, you don't have indoor plumbing? I mean, basically, that problem of carrying water through a house has kind of been solved, But,
yeah, I mean, I agree with you there. I mean, if you can avoid bringing water in and then back out, you would, right? But I mean, that's what the detailer.
With insulation, exterior insulation now, it's sort of.
I was just gonna say, like at White Oak, we kept all the rain leaders in the exterior insulation. Which was the funniest thing, because the comments online were like, you've reduced the insulation value of that wall. I'm like, do the math. We're talking less than 1% of the wall has a rain leader in it. Please, and I have 70% of my wall is glass. So please tell me.
It's wild.
I'm like, what are we? Like, you guys are so insane.
It's like you're going to re-engineer something and spend tens of thousands of dollars to get like an extra 1 inch linear by like 250 linear feet of insulation somewhere, and it's like,
shit, you're right.
Why?
I'm gonna get rid of the windows. I'm gonna no windows and no rain leaders. We're good.
Yeah,
perfect wall.
It's wild. I appreciate your mentality and your perspective. I what you say and what you feel you believe in, and your take on the industry resonates with me very strongly. It's something that I've felt, everything right down to, I don't want to be doing the same thing every day. As soon as I have the bulk of whatever's the most difficult aspect of my job figured out, I'm ready to move on to the next thing and hand it off. And that I also feel that there should be one builder or one designer, somebody handling and managing the entire project of the job and being a steward for that job. All resonates with me. I've been able to find a way to make that slightly more lucrative, but I think the biggest holdback and what challenged me for many years was just trying to capture those costs. It's just like diminishing returns. You're just working for free.
Tyler, I want to share a thought I had the other day, because I was watching you, speaking of doing one thing and then like being done with it, like I don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
I was watching you put all the hangers on.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, and you're using the palm nailer. I'm like, dude, buy a gun, dude. Like,
I have a gun. It's the long nails.
And so I'm sitting there thinking about it, and then so I'm building this cabin, like this little bunkhouse for my kids up in New Hampshire, and it's big. It's like 12 by 24. And so I started putting the hangers on the other day, and I'm doing it by hand, like hammer and nails. And I did too, and I had this thought, and I was like, nope. I'm like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to fucking hate it. But I'm going to power through it. And my back killed. Like, I just was hunched over, slamming nails, and I was like, only 30 more to go. We got this.
I had like 350. Yeah, the gun doesn't shoot the 3-inch like thick ones. It can only shoot up to 2.5.
Got it.
So for
I used
all
to have
the
a stop nailer that had interchangeable noses, and it had you could put a special large hanger nail nose on the front of it. You know,
oh, that's
I had
nice.
the same thing. I did not want to nail hangers. You know, especially in tight spaces.
I think some people just put the
That's
short
the
nails in there and
thing.
call it good. So
Yeah, I mean, especially on the double shear nails, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Just throw the 1.5 in so they're just going into your joist and nothing else.
Yeah, you're good.
But it's almost like if every person on your crew, if you said to them, I will pay you for the outcome, and you can work a 2-hour day if you want, as long as you get that outcome, but it has to be a certain quality standard, you would sort of develop a habit of thinking, which I think is like, one example I give is I learned years ago for cutting studs. My first house that I built was a post and beam house, and I bought this 16-inch. I call it the amputator. It was a 16-inch Makita.
Oh yeah,
You hold the blade guard up, and the blade's like an inch from your thigh. But I realized you could cut 2x6s on edge, and so these guys were framing out a basement the other day, and they were literally measuring and cutting with a worm drive each stud. And I said, let's take 100 studs, put them on the ground, slam them up against the wall, and we're going to cut through all 100 in one pass on edge. And there, we're done,
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, that's magic. And I'm like, how can you be framers and not think
Think that.
I'm cutting one at a time,
Right.
And they're like, no, we're not, because we have a stop fence on the saw, so all we have to do is lift each piece up.
Oh yeah,
and
because
cut
that
it.
stop fence never moves.
Yeah. And also you're handling 100 pieces,
Yeah.
So I think if you extend to every single aspect of the job a kind of obsession with efficiency, you can actually somehow do custom work and still make a living.
Love that, David. Thanks for coming on, man.
Yeah,
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
This
Nice
was
to
great.
meet you, Tyler. So
Absolutely. I really appreciate your perspective. I feel like you in a past life. I understand the struggles.
I'm the older, bitter version of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm bitter.
You're not
at
too
times.
bitter.
I understand. I understand the struggles, though.
All right. Take care, guys.
Like, I love his perspective. He's like, you can build custom. You just have to be efficient. And I have been like just so focused on this conversation, and it's like, dude, we can be more efficient. We just have to. And pairing that with more complicated construction, which we are not getting away from, that means you have to be spending more time figuring it out.
I think the difficult part is just that with what we have at our fingertips in software and AI and cell phones and email, we're just expected to be able to put so much more work in place. Like, we're economizing all of this stuff to be able to produce more, and it's still at the same rate. So we're actually getting less for what we're doing.
No,
so I think that's the big challenge, right? Where it's like, well, if I was just using all of this to be able to do more and I was working less, that would be one thing, but it's just doing more so you could do more and not necessarily making any money. I think that's where the challenge is.
Well, I think I said it before. I asked my lawyer, I was like, are you, with all this AI stuff, are you working less? Like, is it taking work from you? And he's like, he's like, we did the math. It's doubled our work.
Yeah.
And I said, how's it doubled your work? He goes, because now people go through AI first, and their questions are more pointed. Mm-hmm. He's like, and as a lawyer, when we're on retainer, like we're required to answer you.
Yeah.
So when you ask me a really like, you used to be like, hey, is this good? Yep. Okay, great. Now it's, hey, provision 7.13 says that I don't get paid for 30 days. Can I adjust that?
Yep.
And it's like,
you're making way more changes.
Way more. I'm like, well, good for you, man. All right, guys. Hey, check out moderncraftsman.co. Make sure you sign up for our newsletter. We also just launched the Modern Craftsman system, which is 5 systems that both Tyler and I use to run our business. All of that information is on the website and links below. And yeah, make sure you join our community, and we'll see you next week.